Welcome to a special edition of Women on the Front Lines. I'm Rania, Batrice, Interim Executive Director of March for Science, and I'm so excited to be joining you during our Earth Week Media Zone. During this week, we're going to be highlighting the four main pillars of March for Science: public health, climate, democracy, and justice. And I'm so excited about our next guest. I've had the privilege to work alongside her and organize alongside her, and she is an absolute force. She is the Climate Justice Campaign Director for NDN Collective and an all-around badass. Welcome, Jade Begay. Hey, Jade.
Hi, how are you? Good to be here.
Yeah, so happy that you found some time for us. You are just so incredible. And there's so much for us to talk about. But first, I would just love for you to share your journey with us. Everybody kind of comes about it a little differently. And I know in so many ways, climate justice is kind of part of your DNA. But if you could, I would love for you to share with our audience how you came to this work.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. I appreciate a good origin story. Yeah, so like you kind of mentioned or alluded to, climate change has definitely been a part of my life, even though it was never really called climate change until I started working in the fields that I work in and within the issue areas that I work in now. But I grew up here in northern New Mexico, which is in the high desert. And water has always been a top issue or a theme or an entity in my life that has been just so important. My community, I'm from Tesuque Pueblo, and I'm also Diné, but I grew up in the village of Tesuque Pueblo, and had the honor and privilege of growing up traditionally and close to my culture and within my Indigenous, traditions. And so for us, really, like, water is a centerpiece of our spirituality, of our traditions, of our ceremonies. And I feel like that has been the piece for me that I come back to when I think about why I care about the things I care about and why I do the work I do. Just seeing my community throughout the year find ways to honor water and pray to the water has just really left this imprint on me throughout my life to do the work to ensure that this area, this region can survive, and we need water to do that. And we're already seeing really dramatic climate impacts here, especially on water. I forgot to mention that our community, like most communities here in northern New Mexico, are farming agriculture communities. So also grew up in that kind of world and seeing those types of practices. And so just that exposure to community work around and with the earth has been kind of the main driver to get me to where I am today. And then also, my parents are both artists. I grew up in Santa Fe, which is, a huge epicenter for Indigenous art, Native art. And so I grew up with these messages throughout my life that were really, pro-Native. And I think that's something that not a lot of Indigenous peoples are exposed to, like, from an early age. And so I grew up feeling very proud of where I'd come from and the communities that I was a part of. And that has also been a factor in really working to protect Indigenous rights and sovereignty and self-determination, wanting just to see my communities continue to thrive and young people being able to, have a similar experience that I did, which is just really affirmative in being Indigenous and being proud of.
Absolutely. And, this work is really hard, and as you know better than most, it can be really gutting. So what are some of the tools that you utilize to just help keep you going and help keep you centered? Is it possible?
Yeah. With a lot of discipline and a lot of work, the self-care, as we all are calling it these days, the buzzword. It does take work on top of all the work that we do to really prioritize that in our lives. I think, a lot of us come from families or backgrounds where, working was kind of like was a value, right? It's an American value. It's a, blue collar value. We get our worth from how much we work. And also, I think for other communities or communities that I come from too, it's how we show our love, being of service. We show, showing up and being involved in our communities. That's our way of giving back, of showing reciprocity. And sometimes it's easy to forget to show that same service or that same kind of love to ourselves. So, I think it's like a healing practice to kind of undo those things and think about the nuances of why we don't prioritize ourselves. But luckily, I've been sort of on the train of navigating burnout my entire career, and I was lucky to be exposed to those kinds of things early on in my career. And it's always just a balancing act of how to, give what I can and hustle and be fierce in the work, but also really prioritize my well-being. Someone said to me very early on as I was learning and coming in to the work I do that, if we're fighting for this, our goals of justice, of equity, but when we get there, we're too tired or we're sick or we're, we have dis-ease and we can't enjoy the fruits of our labor, then what are we doing? And I really try to remind myself of that. So, it's everything from creating, really good like time boundaries on the work. It's about, being outside and getting off the screens. All of these little things really add up, and that's really how I try to navigate that balance.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that and for reminding us that there were several very imperative reminders in there. So thank you.
Yeah.
And you've really been on the front lines of so many climate justice issues, including one that we've been working together on, and that is shutting down the Dakota Access Pipeline, which of course is operating illegally. The White House recently made the very disappointing decision to do nothing about the pipeline that, again, is operating illegally. Even the appellate judge ruled as much. It's very disappointing. It's been an ongoing fight, of course, we know for many, many years, even before the pipeline started getting built. And so, especially as this pipeline's operation intersects with so many issues: water, justice, climate, sovereignty, everything. What's next? How do we keep pushing this effort forward despite a disappointing setback?
Yeah, disappointing and expected. It's not surprising that there's holdups. The reality is this pipeline carries 5% of the nation's oil. It's a big deal. to shut it down. But we're gonna get there, and we're gonna keep working and pressuring the courts, the Army Corps of Engineers, but most importantly, we're gonna focus on targeting the president. That's where that next step is, and I think that's where it's key for our allies and other grassroots or frontline organizations to help contribute to the momentum and help build the momentum. This administration has made really big goals around reducing emissions. They have an entire climate agenda. They have a whole climate plan that states that their goal is to have 100% clean renewable or clean energy and net zero emissions no later than 2050. The Dakota Access Pipeline is a direct opposition or a direct contradiction to that target. And so, we need to drill down on these goals that the administration has set for themselves. Another big goal that they've uplifted many times since the inauguration was to strengthen relationships with tribes and to strengthen nation-to-nation relationships. And the Standing Rock Sioux tribe has made it extremely clear that they don't want this pipeline. So I think we need to move, more towards the direction of honoring, the demands and the wishes of tribes. And so I think those are some of the next steps that, we can all take is continuing to build that pressure on the administration, on the president, and it's not going to happen overnight. We know that we're realistic here, but we do need to make these types of bold changes, and those are really the types of steps and the types of actions that are going to show and demonstrate commitment to, whether it's a climate plan or an American jobs plan. It's a big transition, we know that, but that's the kind of action we've been needing. We wasted 4 years, unfortunately, and we just don't have that time anymore.
Absolutely. You're an artist yourself and a filmmaker, and at March for Science, we talk a lot about the importance of meeting people where they are, and people sort of finding their place and their voice in a number of different ways. So I'd love for you to just share how your art has coincided with your advocacy and your activism.
Yeah. So specifically, the type of art that I work in is film and storytelling. I went to undergrad for film, documentary film, and that's been another big part of my work and my advocacy. Sometimes I moonlight as a narrative strategist, and that work really goes hand in hand with a lot of the climate and environmental justice work. We need strong narratives to carry that work. But representation in the media, fighting and pushing against erasure is a big part of what I'm passionate about. And then when it comes to, issues like climate change and urgent issues like racial justice, I think that working at the intersections of art and culture are really strong ways of changing culture and changing narratives. So yeah, that's been a real big part of the work I do. And actually, related to your question earlier about how we take care of ourselves in this work, it's those types of projects, that creative outlet that really supports me and gets me into a different headspace and gets me to think and see things from different perspectives, and also brings creativity and solutions that I wouldn't have thought of if I was just coming from a strategic point of view. The minute I step into an artistic place, then that's when new ways of talking about a thing or doing direct action, that's when those big like light bulb ideas come up. And so, just to add that in there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love that. It's a beautiful reminder that, again, just meeting people where they are means so many different things. And the storytelling component of that, really reaching people on a human level, is so impactful. And that really sort of brings me to my next question for you. We talk a lot over here at March for Science about how we can't talk about climate without talking about justice. The two things are inextricably connected. We're seeing front and center, not that it's new, but just reminders of why they are so connected and cannot be decoupled. So just would love for you to share your thoughts on Indigenous science and the critical role it plays in informing how we address the climate crisis.
Yeah, really good question. And I think that's, just to speak to some of the work that I do at Indian Collective. So a big tenet of our climate justice work is believing that our people are actually already have the solutions to climate change. And what they need is support, and in a lot of circumstances, resources to be able to reconnect and learn their ancestral technology, their traditional ecological technology and knowledge. Whether you're Gwich'in up in the Arctic, whether you're here and you're Pueblo in the Southwest, all of these communities have had technology or information or ways of working with the earth that are harmonious, that are quote unquote, net zero emissions. And we just need to revitalize those practices. And so at NDN, a big part of our climate programming is leading workshops, leading trainings, not just ourselves. We partner with, Indigenous peoples, Indigenous leaders and community members who are teaching their skills. And we give, the community those resources and create that time and space for people to come together in practicing those ways. We just believe that Indigenous peoples, frontline communities already have good solutions. We just need to move the resources and create the time and space for people to reconnect with those practices. Another part of that is when it comes to things like, the Green New Deal, which definitely promote solar energy and renewable energy and, practices that are, like I said, create low emissions. Again, we have those kinds of practices, and we just need to be working in ways and investing in Indigenous communities so they can be leading those solutions and creating and building those solutions to scale in their communities. Can you remind me the second part of that question?
No, that was it. Basically, you answered the whole thing. And I'll just, listen. You bring up all the good points, and we just need to listen. You provide the resources and center the voices, and then we all just need to listen and absorb and internalize, and then help be good allies and put into practice. Thank you so much for sharing that wisdom.
And I think just one more piece to that is I think beyond, listening to people, which is great. We all need to practice listening. And, that's a huge part of of becoming allies and creating allyship and creating trust and good relationships. But I think when it comes to climate action, when it comes to things like the Dakota Access Pipeline, beyond just listening, we need to be investing and really centering Indigenous leadership. And I'm really excited to see, the big moves that have been made recently with Secretary Deb Haaland becoming, the leader of the Department of Interior. I'm excited at seeing people like Howie Rivera leading the Indian Tribal Office Affairs or Office of Tribal Affairs at the White House. There's all these people who are stepping into these big decision-making roles. And I think we just need to see more of that when we have our people not just being heard and not just, having their thoughts and concerns considered, but actually at the table making the decisions. That's going to open so many doors, so much more potential for the change that we've been really asking for generations. So I'm so grateful for all the work and all the organizing that it took to get these wins this year, and I really hope that we keep at it and keep opening up doors for our people.
Yeah, I think you mentioned it at the very beginning about representation, and that to your point, that representation matters deeply. So thank you again for all of the reminders. And I have one last question for you that we ask all of our incredible women on the front lines, which Secretary Haaland is also one of our women on the front lines. So you share great company. But what advice would you give your 13-year-old self?
Oh, wow. That's a good one. I think I have to think about that one for a minute. I think earlier I mentioned that I grew up in this community, in a household that was very affirmative about my identity. My mom worked at the Institute of American Indian Art. My dad showcased his work at SWAIA, the Indian market, and all around me were just beautiful representations of contemporary Native people, just doing amazing things, being so creative. And so it's not so much that it's new advice, but I think it's just continuing that kind of practice of affirming to our young people that there's so much potential for them, and it's, I think, just continuing to put the message out there that it's okay to be proud of yourself, and just that they deserve to. I was always told that I deserve all the things. I was spoiled in that way of being told that I deserved a good education, I deserved good healthcare. My family was very, very affirmative in that way, and I think I would continue to do that. And continue to, and in the same, breath, I think with those types of sentiments, my parents also gave me like a sense of coming from abundance, which I know that is like kind of like a buzzwordy thing these days. But it is really, it can really like change the way that you see the world, not coming from scarcity. And I know that scarcity mindset does lead to like so much lateral oppression, not just in the Native Indigenous community, but like also in the social justice world where we don't think that there's enough for all of us. You see different movement spaces fighting each other for resources or for airtime, media time, and I think, now I'm rambling, but I think in bestowing that type of mindset onto our young people is going to be really important, especially as we move into a world where things like resources, like water, for instance, becomes scarce. Just how can we cultivate abundance, and how can we create cultures of abundance so we're not fighting each other.
Absolutely. Oh, Jade, thank you so much. I really can't thank you enough for spending some time with us today, and for all of the incredible and important work that you've done and you continue to do. Thank you. And thanks so much to our viewing audience for tuning in. We'll be right back with another very exciting interview.
Thank you.
Welcome back, everyone, to a very special episode of Women on the Front Lines. As March for Science centers justice as one of our foundational pillars, we are very excited to bring you this episode. Of course, as many of you know, this is March for Science's series featuring badass women doing all kinds of incredible things all across the country. And joining me today is our fabulous co-host and formerly featured badass, Mary Annaïse Heglar. Hey, Mary.
Hi, happy Earth Month. How are you?
Hanging in. Still, I feel like every time we talk, it's just sort of like hanging in. Things are okay. Could be better in so many ways, but could be worse in so many ways. So, good for 2021.
Well, I will just reiterate my recent news, which is that I got my first shot of my vaccine. So thank you, science.
Yes, thank you, science. Exactly. Oh my gosh, I really do feel. Hopefully you won't have the reaction I had to the second one. But again, as I've said multiple times, I would do it 1,000 times more, as we all should. And hope we're seeing these increased numbers, which is very, very exciting, as folks folks are getting vaccinated across the country more and more. Lots more work to do, of course, but that's trucking right along. So thank you for bringing us back to positive, and I will tuck my Eeyore tail away and let us get to some good things, which I'm very, very, very excited to highlight the work of our friends. It's such an honor when we get to do that. And today is one of those days. And we are so excited to please have us welcome here a real life superhero, and more officially, research scientist at NASA Goddard Institute for Space Studies and the Columbia University Center for Climate Systems Research, Dr. Kate Marvel.
Hello. Hey, hi, friends. How's it going?
How are you?
I feel like that's a weird question in the pandemic. But surviving, about to get a shot today, which I am so stoked about.
Your second shot, right?
My second shot, yes.
Yeah, so you're going to get power soon. Yeah.
Thank you, science.
Yes.
One thing can I just say about Kate before we get into this? So what makes me so sick about Kate is that she is a brilliant scientist, but also a brilliant writer. And she is the author of the quote on my shirt right now: "This is the only good planet." And Kate, what are you wearing today?
I'm so embarrassed. This is so awkward.
Kate's embarrassed, and I have huge, whatever the equivalent of not FOMO, but actually missing out. That's what I have. So whatever the cool kids say that is, that's where I'm at.
I feel like my entire wardrobe these days is podcast merch, and I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Love
We
it.
loved Kate's quote so much that we stole it for our podcast and made a shirt out of it. So, yeah.
Ultimate form of flattery. It used to be, what was it, like copying somebody? There's a better word, but now it's actually if you end up on a T-shirt, that's the ultimate form of flattery. In case anybody out there didn't know.
Yeah, you did ask her first, though.
Oh well, I mean, key.
Yeah.
So I again am just so excited that we have you with us here today, Kate, and really like two of my favorite humans on screen together. Merry Christmas to me. I know it's not Christmas time, but whatever. But before we dive into the conversation, I want to ask you about something that's super specific, and I hope you remember because it was freaking awesome, and I reference it all the time, and I butcher it all the time. But you and I got to speak on a panel together at the UN a couple of years ago, of course, in the before times. But we were talking about how easy it seems for people to think that climate change isn't about them. It doesn't affect them. It's I'm not on a small island. I'm not in a coastal city, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If they happen to not be impacted directly or not realize that they're being impacted directly right in this moment. But you said something so poetic, and every single time I try to say it, I want for once and for all, everybody out there to hear your brilliance in a way that I cannot capture. So can you right now, for the sake of everyone tuning in, share that moment again, if you're able, explain in your beautiful and brilliant way how everything and everyone is connected.
So I go off on this a lot because I'm just completely obsessed with it. The fact that this planet is so interconnected and so brilliant, and life can exist on this planet, and like life cannot exist on other planets, like sorry Mars. So like Earth is definitely the best planet for sure. And I think about that interconnection a lot, sort of when I'm looking at a climate model or I'm looking at the physics of the Earth, because the thing to know about air is that hot air rises and cools, and hot air holds more water vapor. And so what that means is that in the tropics, it's a lot hotter. And so that hot air rises. And as it rises, it's less able to hold water vapor. So it sheds that water. And that's why we have rainforests in the tropics. Mm-hmm. And then that air moves toward the poles. But before it reaches the poles, it cools and it sinks. And those sinking regions are where we have deserts. So that's why the Sahara Desert and the Gobi Desert are all at roughly the same latitude. In the Southern Hemisphere, the Atacama Desert and the Australian Desert. So we would not have deserts if it weren't for the tropics, which I think is beautiful. So the deserts are, in a sense, a gift from the tropics, but the deserts give back, because we know that the dust from the Sahara gets blown off by the prevailing winds, and it carries it all the way across the ocean, where it ends up fertilizing the Amazon rainforest. So I think that that is just a really, really beautiful thing. And it's really colors the way that I think about my job and I think about this planet.
I think it's really interesting to hear you, say so much about air, given that I know that you're an air sign. And even though you don't believe in astrology, you believe in astronomy. I just think that, that's just something in your spirit coming out, Kate. Kate's going to
for the record, I want to point out that it was like a year before I told Mary my birthday. And she had, what did you think I was? You thought I was like an April birthday for a really long time?
Yeah, I thought you were an Aries, but turns out you're a Gemini, but they're both air signs. So I was
sure.
Right the whole
All right.
time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fine.
So Mary, as always, Mary was right. But yeah, I think that has always stuck with me, despite my inability to repeat it. The essence of what you said is just so powerful and so important. And if anybody could take one thing away, I hope it's that, that we all do play a part. Everything is connected. Earth is the best planet. And so I'm not even going to try to repeat what you said, because as I've mentioned now several times, I'm not good at it, but you are brilliant and wonderful. And thank you for sharing that with us again.
Excuse me. So we want to be real when we're having these kinds of conversations. And that means we want to talk about the good and the bad. So I want to ask you, in the work that you're doing now, what are some of the challenges that you're seeing that might give people like a kick in the pants? And I would ask you what gives you hope, but you wrote the seminal essay on why hope doesn't matter, and it's really courage that we need. So what's giving you courage these days?
First of all, seminal is a really weird word, right?
I love it though.
Like, where did it come from? But yeah, I mean, I think I work a lot with future climate projections. So running the climate models forward into the future. And what I notice is like stuff can get really, really bad. Like we cannot escape climate change. It's already here. The Earth is already more than a degree Celsius warmer than it was before the Industrial Revolution. And looking forward into the future, if we continue on the current trajectory, if we continue on a business as usual trajectory for various definitions of business as usual, if we keep putting carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, it looks horrifying. Wildfires, heat waves, floods, massive sea level rise, possible destruction of entire ecosystems. But like the thing that really strikes me is how optional so much of this stuff is. It doesn't have to be that way. From the perspective of the planet, the only thing it really cares about is atmospheric chemistry. And the climate is changing because we are changing the chemistry of the atmosphere. We being humans, not we being you specifically. But humans can choose to not do that. And if we choose to not do that, and I'm not minimizing the scale of the effort that it is going to take to choose to not do that, we do not have to experience the worst case scenarios. Those can stay locked away in my climate models forever.
So in the same vein of what gives us life as we face the realities and the trauma and the dread and so many of us are experiencing, whose work have you seen or read or been a part of that you think people may not have heard of, but definitely should check out?
So this is an awkward question because I generally say yours, but I imagine nobody's watching this who hasn't heard of you. You know, my hot take is that, see what I did there?
Well played, well played.
No, my take is that I actually think if you confine your thinking to things that are explicitly labeled climate change, stamped with that climate label, you're really missing out. You know, we have ways as human beings of dealing with uncertainty, dealing with trauma, dealing with dread and fear and courage and resilience. And those are called like art and literature. Like we've invented those things for a reason. And so I find, you know, going back, reading some of my favorite books, reading historical fiction. You know, I just finished up the last book in the Wolf Hall trilogy, which is just about power struggles and a society that's in flux right now. That has nothing to do with climate change, but it still really resonated with me because these are universal human themes. You know, I think, you know, if you want to get like very specific, this is not comforting at all, but you know, I think we agree that Octavia Butler was psychic. I do not believe in psychics, but she was. And that is not going to provide you any comfort. But reading her books, she really anticipated so much of what we're experiencing right now. And so you can either read that and become completely horrified that everything she says seems to have come true, or you can read it and you can say, these are resonant issues, and we are not the first generation of humans to deal with issues like this.
Yeah, I will say Octavia was extremely empathetic. And that allows you to kind of see where things are going and make those sorts of predictions that make you seem clairvoyant. She also just might have been psychic. I think she was also a Gemini, so that
This is fantastic. And I mean, but you bring up such an important point. An important point, Kate. We're like really trying to fit any of this into a box it doesn't make any sense. And there's all kinds of arguments and debates happening about what is and what isn't true. Does justice have a space here? I mean, of course, the answer is yes, but there are people who are still fighting about it. Not us, obviously. But we often talk about meeting people where they are and different points of entry. And to your point, art, music, film, books, I mean, literature, all these things are different points of entry to reach people, even for our own well-being, even those of us who are already on board and trying to do what we can, just to not feel like, no pun intended, but like you're just on an island by yourself somewhere, so that's such a great point. And as always, appreciate you, how eloquently you said it. I'm not going to try to repeat. But for everyone who tunes in with us, you know what question is coming. And it's the question that we ask every one of our women on the front lines. And that is, what advice would you give your 13-year-old self?
I would not give my 13-year-old self any advice, because I remember my 13-year-old self and she would not have listened to me at all. But I do think it's really interesting. If I went back in time and told my 13-year-old self, you were going to grow up to be a scientist, she would have laughed. She would have said, what are you talking about? I hate science. It's boring. It's not for me. I don't want to be a scientist. Are you insane? And things changed, obviously. I found my way to science. But I think, I wouldn't say I'm a particularly empathetic person, but going back to Mary's point about empathy, I do think that does give me some empathy for people who are really struggling with math, who are really struggling with science, who don't see themselves represented, who don't think of themselves as a math person. Trust me, you are a math person. You just haven't been presented with math in a way that resonates with you. And that's not necessarily your fault. So I think, looking back at my 13-year-old self, I would just blow her mind when I tell her how her life is going to turn out. I probably wouldn't tell her about the global pandemic, because that's
leave that little detail out.
A little depressing.
Yeah.
But, I think it's important to know that who you are at 13 isn't who you are going to turn out to be when you're older. And every moment of your life is just a different snapshot in time. And it really shows how predicting the future using anything but basic physical laws is not really a very good idea.
That's pretty good advice. I know you're not giving it to your 13-year-old self, but I think it's pretty solid. And I will just say too, I remember somebody asking me once, because I'm so obsessed with science, but I am not a scientist. And somebody asked me once, I think I've shared this story before, well, why aren't you a scientist? And I really kind of broke down that question and was like, oh, because I was just told that I was bad at it and that was it. I mean, there is very much a gendered component to all of this as well, and cultural on my side of things. But I think just in it at large, there's just really, girls and women maybe more so now. There's a little bit more encouragement than there used to be, but there still isn't just a ton of encouragement. If I see one more pink aisle and blue aisle, those still exist. Some stores are doing better, but it's those things do still exist, where the boys get the chemistry sets and the girls get the easy bake ovens, or whatever the hell the equivalent is of that these days. I don't know. And again, there's been some progress, but not enough in my mind. But anyway, Kate, thank you so much. Apologies for all my rantings and waxing poetic over here.
Thank you so much for joining us, Kate. It's always a pleasure to have you and to talk to you. And thank you for indulging me in my opinion that octopuses are aliens.
They definitely are.
Thank you.
So can we just say, to recap, you have trolled me into agreeing with astrology, psychics, and aliens.
You agreed with the aliens on Twitter.
Yeah. All right here, though. All right here on this show. You heard it here. Maybe not first, but all together. Right. So I'm just saying, this is a very special moment. Yeah, on the record. Thank you so much, Kate. Thank you, Mary.
All right.
Thanks for everybody out there tuning in. Until next time.
Bye.
Thank you.